cost to doing the work and there's a cost to staying the same. You have to decide which price you value.
What is up, friends? Welcome to the She Blooms podcast. My name is Stacie Danielle, of course. Thank you for joining me for another week here. I know we took some time off last week, but that was due to the Thanksgiving holiday. I hope that you guys just had an enjoyable time with your family, your friends. I hope that you are just filled with joy, gratitude, as we are just transitioning into a more joyful time of the year, going into the new year, where I know so many people are thinking about how this year has gone, where they want next year to go, trying to outline some of those goals that they have for next year. And I hope that in all of that you are still finding rest, that you are still releasing the shame from not doing everything that was on your to-do list or things that you really wanted to accomplish this year. I hope that you can just give yourself mercy and not only approach the new year with a fresh set of eyes, but with the diligence of saying, no matter what, I'm going to try my best, whatever that looks like for you, right? Because that can change from day to day. It doesn't necessarily mean that your best is going to be like 2024 is my year. If you know that you just want to make a little adjustments to your day to day, whether that's your routine, whether how you show up for yourself, whether how you want to show up in relationships with other people, take those little steps. Don't feel like you have to go 100% all out. Enjoy this transition as we approach a new year, as we approach a new season. Really just be in tune with who you are right now. Aside from that, how is your guys' week? I know me, I have just had the craziest week so far, with just some very good highs, some uncomfortable lows. And like I said in my last video, how to deal with grief, I talked about noticing myself, right? Like catching myself when I would notice that I would be avoiding and trying to pencil in more things in order to escape the pain. And so I think this week had been a real testament of like, how do you stay in this? Like, how do you stay in these moments? Because knowing that like at the end of the day, like all is well. I know that we can get so hyper focused on like why things are happening, why am I not feeling better, like what's going on, and feeling like our whole world is collapsing in those lows. But I promise you, the way that you are truly able to embody peace and get out of yourself and grow and cultivate a healthy relationship with yourself is if you're addressing things with, it sucks right now. This is hard right now, admitting it, but just knowing that there are better days to come, and it's easier said than done, right? Like, I am not in any way trying to minimize anyone's experience. I am not trying to get you in the state where you feel like you have to avoid, dismiss what you're feeling or what you're going through. But I hope that in everything, knowing that there are better days ahead of you, or there could be better days ahead of you. And sometimes it really does take us getting out of what's comfortable. And sometimes what's comfortable is us sitting in our soul and allowing ourselves to sulk in whatever we're going through. And as we just talk about what's comfortable, right? This episode is all about safety. So what does it mean to be safe? And the reason why I thought about this is I think often we have a lot of relationships. We talk about emotional safety. We talk about what does it mean for someone to be safe, right? We talk about like, be my peace, be my peace. Well, if that person doesn't feel safe with you, then there is an element of they can't necessarily be your safe place, right? Or they can't be your peace because they are also hyper vigilant on everything else, right? Like they're hyper aware of what's going on. And so I thought about this as I was just laying with my daughter, and she was laying her head on my lap, and she just looked back at me and was just like, "Mommy, I'm so comfortable with you." And as someone who is very big about the relationship that I have with my kids, like, and I talk about this all the time, is that at the end of the day, I want to know that I have cultivated and created a safe atmosphere with my children, because I didn't have that growing up, right? Like I had a very turmoil relationship with my father. I felt like at one point, it really boiled down to me just not respecting him anymore. Like, and me and my dad actually talk about this now, because I do have a relationship with him. And so we talk about this now, where I just lost respect for him. Like, if you know, like my dad used to be a pastor, and he also struggled with drug addiction. And on top of that was physically abusive, and I just didn't understand like how someone who would have that much God in them could do this to their family. And I stopped listening to what he was saying. I stopped listening to what he was saying, and I started paying attention to what he was doing. And right, that goes back to that like safety component, is like, how can you trust that someone is safe when their actions and words don't align? And so I'm just very, very thankful that I have, cultivated a relationship with my kids where they feel comfortable talking to me. Like we have like deep conversations. Like my 9-year-old knows that he can come to me for absolutely anything, and he does. And he knows that he's not going to be met with shame. He knows that he's not going to be met with resentment. He knows that I am not going to turn up on him. I'm not going to get angry, because I want that, right? Like I want him to feel safe enough to come to me first before anyone else, because we know the way of this world and where it's going, and how just lost we are as a generation, how lost we are, and how many people are trying to seek safety, seek refuge, and so many other things. But I still believe, I still have hope that we are going to reach a spot where more people are returning to God. And I genuinely believe that from my bottom of my heart. Like I had been that lost soul. I had been someone who was seeking. I had been that person who was trying to find safety in any and everything, right? Whether that was like sex, relationships, drugs, anything, in order to find some sort of peace. But it really wasn't until I went inward where I was like, oh, I need to find safety within myself. And how do you find safety within yourself when there is so many components of you that has to reprogram, when you have lived on edge majority of your life? Like, what does it mean to find safety within yourself, and how do you do that? And I think this is kind of where we are today, of what does safe look like, what does safe feel like, and what isn't safe for us, right? Because I think often, if we have grown up with trauma, or if we have been approached with continuous and repeated cycles in our life, our perception of safe tends to shift a little bit. And I know you guys see it all the time on social media, where people talk about the idea of peace, right? Like, not to mistake peace with boredom. The reality is that there are so many people who have grown up in tumultuous families, lifestyles, that the idea of sitting still, safe, or not being in environments where they are constantly on edge that doesn't feel safe for them. It's like, how can I create some sort of chaos in order to make myself feel comfortable? Like, what do I need to do to make myself feel comfortable right now? Because this isn't it. This doesn't feel safe for me. And I've been there before. I remember after, I believe after my divorce, after everything, I remember just meeting with my therapist, and I was just like, this feels different. And she was like, it's safety, Stacie. Like, that's what safe feels like. Like, you aren't walking on eggshells, you aren't trying to watch your words, you've reached a place in your life where you're content with your career, and where that's going. She's just like, you're safe and it's okay. And I remember being uncomfortable with it, of like, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, I know that I have been a person who has like thrived in chaos, and not even in a bad chaos, but like overworking myself, like escaping, staying super busy, being in toxic relationships. And so I think once you get to a point where you are no longer compromising that aspect of you, it is like, how do I feel safe in this right now? Like, how do I be okay with the quiet and the stillness, so then that way I can transition from wanting to live on edge and seeking thrills to just sitting in this and being at peace, knowing that peace isn't boredom. And how I was able to do that is that I started spending more time with myself. I am naturally introverted. I always have been. I really do believe in the quantity of friendships. So I have always had like maybe 2 to 3, max 4 girlfriends. But I'm also a homebody, so I love being at home by myself. But I think there were periods of my life where if I wasn't necessarily in a relationship, right? Or even if I wasn't hanging out with like my friends, I was always still trying to fill that time with something, right? Whether that was aimlessly scrolling on Instagram, like listening to music, hooking up with people, that I wasn't in a relationship. There was still a component of me that was like still actively looking for some sort of stimulation in order to escape myself. And I know I've mentioned it before, but like the pandemic like really set so much stuff in motion for me. And like, I understand like COVID was like such a horrible time for so many people. I get that. But for me, it was probably the most enlightened experience that I had, because I was no longer able to run from myself. I had to actually, for the first time, spend time with myself in the silence, in the quiet, to focus on me. Like, what does it mean to actually sit with yourself? Like, no one can do that anymore. Like, we are so hyper focused on stimulation and like relationships, and there's nothing wrong with that. Community is an important aspect for us, especially when we're healing, especially while we're on this journey. We need people in our environment in order to safe people. Let's get that right. We don't just need people, we need safe people in our life in order to get us and continue our healing journey, right? Because we can do a lot in isolation by ourselves. There's so many times where I know that I have been called into isolation, and I ignored, some before, but this was the moment where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Like, I genuinely had to be in an isolated place, so then that way I couldn't rely on anyone. I had to finally stop running from myself in order to feel safe. I think there are a lot of things that we feel safe and comfortable with. We feel comfortable with aimlessly hooking up. We feel comfortable with smoking weed, drinking, partying, doing all of these things. We are comfortable with toxic relationships that devalue us because that's all that we're used to. And I am no saint in this, trust me. There are so many times where I have compromised my level of worth and out of the convenience of like, well, I love this person. But you can love people and still decide that they're not a safe place for you. And how do we identify what is safe, right? Like, in order to get to that place of identifying what is safe or who is safe for you, you first have to seek that in yourself. And once you create that home environment within yourself and knowing that there is nothing external that could affect you, you have to be comfortable in your skin. You don't have to be perfect, right? No one is at that place. No one is striving for perfection. We are all about progress. We are all about how do we get to that next level of the relationship with ourselves where we can see our insecurity pinpointed and still decide that we're not going to believe it, right? Like, that's safety. We're creating a safe environment where we can understand that we still have flaws, that we're imperfect people, that we are still growing and learning, but we don't necessarily have to believe the lies that we tell ourselves of that we aren't enough, that we're overweight, that I need to be better, that if I prove myself to this person or myself, then that initially is going to make me happy, right? So that's how we start to create that safety within ourselves, is understanding like, what are some characteristics or what are some flaws that we have? What do we tell ourselves when nobody's around, right? Because you can preach and say that you have confidence all day, but at the end of the day, like, who are you when you are by yourself, when it is quiet, when there is nobody around? Like, what is the narrative that you say to yourself again and again? And it really is changing that dialogue, spending time with yourself, knowing what's comfortable. I know, as someone who has experienced like sexual assault before in the past, like, I remember I felt so uncomfortable, like sleeping at men's house. Like, I wouldn't stay the night at men's house. And there was a reason for that, right? Like, I think that there was just so many concerns, right? Because even friendships had taken advantage of me in that way. And so I didn't ever feel comfortable staying the night at people's house. And so as I started understanding, like, okay, well, what is a healthy touch? Like, what feels safe for you? Like, what are your boundaries surrounding touch? What are your boundaries just in general, right? I think that if we don't have a grasp on what our boundaries are, there is no way that we're going to be able to feel safe with another person, aside from feeling safe within ourselves. Like, if your boundaries are constantly ebbing and flowing in order to please or appease another person, then you aren't a safe place. And if you aren't a safe place, that's fine, but how get to that place where you're comfortable with your boundaries, you understand what you're willing and willing not to tolerate, like, what are your non-negotiables in a relationship? And the only way that you can do these things is if you begin to start asking yourself the hard questions of like, what feels safe? What in the past did I deem to be safe? And if I felt that was safe, like, how did it make me feel at the end of it, right? Because we can often be like, oh yeah, this relationship feels safe to me, they're cussing me out, they're calling me all types of names, but I grew up with this. Like, so it's normal for you. It's normal for you to identify or contort the idea of safety because it's familiar. And that doesn't necessarily, there's nothing safe about people calling you out of your names. I have worked with teen girls in parenting for a really long time, and I had to have those conversations with them of being like, it is not okay for your boyfriend to call you out of your name, and vice versa, right? Like, you should never get to that place. Like, that's not safe, that's not healthy in the least bit. And if you are noticing that you think this is normal, then you have to do some of that reprogramming of like, do I call myself this? Do I treat myself this? And I think once you realize, the more that you treat yourself with respect, dignity, once you actually stand up for your boundaries and have non-negotiables, there's so many things that you will no longer tolerate in relationships, because you know what it feels like to be safe within yourself. You know what it feels like to treat yourself, not like royalty, right? Like, we aren't getting to that place, but you know what it means to treat yourself with dignity and respect, and you expect that same treatment from other people. And as you begin to do that inner work, then you can identify like who is safe in your life. And that goes into having safe relationships. It is so important to have safe relationships. There is absolutely nothing that you can do to feel safe within yourself if you don't have the right environment. You're going to constantly feel like you're walking on eggshells. You're going to constantly feel drained. You're going to constantly feel like you are overcompensating for relationships, and it's taking you further and further away from yourselves. And we aren't doing that anymore. We are reaching a time in our lives where we are growing. We want to do better. We want to grow closer to ourselves. And if we continue to allow ourselves to be in spaces and environments, we are compromising our safety at the expense of love. We are going to pull further away from who we are, or who we are becoming, or going back to places where we had become before trauma, before the abuse, before everything began to rob us from our true identities. I am just going to leave you with just 3 things that you can do in order to cultivate really healthy relationship and safety within yourself. The first point is to stop doing what's familiar and comfortable. I know that often it is so easy for us to revert back into ourselves, but you cannot heal in the same environments or the same behaviors and patterns that have bound us to the most damaged aspect of who we are. In order to cultivate safety in yourself, you have to be okay with saying no. You have to be okay with walking away from any and anything that doesn't serve you anymore. Any and anything that continues to rob you. Everything that continues to take you back to a place that you have outgrown. And not to say, right, like, I think often people think of like relationships, right? Like, let's just talk in terms of relationships. People often think like, oh, okay, so I've done the healing work, like relationships should be easy. No, that's not the case. Like, there is always going to be triggers that come up to the surface. But if you are noticing that this person that you are in a relationship with is not willing to do the work, not willing to have the hard conversations, not willing to make you feel safe, right? Like, they're still bringing out that hypervigilant aspect of you, and they aren't willing to like navigate those like conversations with you, right? Because a relationship is founded on the amount of hard conversations that you're willing to have. And if you aren't able to have those hard conversations, there's a possibility that you are with the wrong person. And we have to address that. You have to address that you can't heal in environments that have continued to keep you bound to the broken aspect of who you are. The next one is embrace change. We are so afraid of change. We are so coupled with the false sense of who we are that we don't know what it feels like to not operate out of trauma. And if we are uncomfortable with operating out of trauma, then we will continue to revert back to patterns that allowed us to feel safe before. So be okay with change. Embrace change, knowing that wherever you are going, is far better than you've ever been. And sometimes we have to make those little shifts and adjustments in order to feel safe within ourselves, to know that we can do it, to know that we are healing, to know that we have the capacity to grow past whatever allowed us to stay bound to ourselves before. And the third point is giving yourself grace. I mean, we are going to ebb and flow on this journey. Trust me, there are so many times where I'm like, I swear I got it right, and I didn't. I still ebb and flow on this journey. I still, have moments of weakness and like we'll revert back to stuff that feels safe, right? Like I talked about the avoidant aspect of me, like that feels comfortable. And you have to give yourself grace, because if you are not giving yourself grace and mercy, then you're going to feel like you're not doing the work. And if you're not doing the work or feeling like you're doing the work, then you're going to quit. And there is nothing safe in quitting, right? Because we are embracing change. We are being okay with what's uncomfortable. And the only way that we can truly give ourselves grace is knowing that sometimes we'll get it wrong. Sometimes we'll get it right. But when we get it wrong, we still have the opportunity to move forward in life. I hope you guys got something from this. Please stay tuned. If you haven't, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your post notifications. See you guys next time.